Nechama, Mr. Jack Terzi, Alav Hashalom. He was a very strong influence on me growing up in Sharet Zion, going to shul. He always made sure that all the kids felt welcome and had a love to come, and I credit a lot of my love of praying and attending shul services to Mr. Terzi. I hope that his family will be comforted in knowing that they had such a wonderful, wonderful father, and I'm sure they have many wonderful memories with him. I also want to take a minute to personally thank Sarah Towell. She has been working around the clock for years in promoting the class, all the classes, not just my own, and bringing the classes to everybody's fingertips. For those of you who know Sarah, she doesn't just tell you about the class, she stays on the phone with you till you're able to log in. And she's really, really a big force that I want to personally thank. Last but of course not least, I also would like to thank Gail Peltzer. She's a driving force with her enthusiasm. She's always rallying the troops and letting people know about the classes and finds ways to thank me. And I love all of you. I know I'm getting mushy here, but I just want to say we're off season already. This is the summer classes have ended, and I just feel that I still would love, with your permission, to keep teaching and learning together because I feel it's a beautiful relationship and friendship that we've started. And as long as there are parshiyot to learn, I hope that we're able to learn them together. So we're going to start today in Perashat Shofetim. We're going to read the first 3 Pesukim, and then we're going to see how it speaks to us today. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. You shall appoint judges and officers bechol sha'arecha, in all of the gates of your cities. Asher Hashem Elohecha noten lecha, that God Hashem gives to you, and lishvatecha, to your tribes, shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek, judge the people with righteous judgment. I'm struggling to translate this because we're not sure what mishpat means. We're not sure what tzedek means. We'd like to say righteous judgment. That sounds like an easy way to define it, but we're going to do some learning today to really explore what those words mean. I want to take the next 2 Pesukim, lo tateh mishpat, lo takir panim. Make sure that you don't pervert justice and you don't show favoritism. Lo tikach shochad, don't take a bribe, because the bribe, the shochad, will ye'aver enei chachamim, will make the eyes of even the wise man blind. Visalef divrei tzadikim, and it will also warp the words of a tzaddik. And then this 3rd verse to end our little parshiat, tzedek tzedek tirdof, make sure that you chase after this thing called tzedek. Again, I'd like to say it means righteousness. We're going to look into it a little further. Lema'an tichyeh, so that you will live. V'irashta et haaretz asher Hashem Elohecha noten lach, and you'll be able to inherit the land that Hashem has is giving you. So we have 3 Pesukim, and between you and me, this is not anything so new. We've had this concept before. We've learned before the idea of having Shoftim. If you would, go to the 1st chapter in Sefer Devarim. In verse 16, we have this idea also, Va'atzaveh et shoftechem, and I have commanded your tribes at that time, saying, listen between your brothers and judge tzedek, righteousness, between man and his brother and between the Gid. This is not technically something new, and it follows up lo takiru panim, exactly like what we have in our parasha today. But there is a difference. If you'll notice in the first chapter of Devarim, we have the command being given in the plural. It's being said, lo takiru panim bamishpat. Tishma'un, lo taguru. It's all being said in a collective way for many people. As we look back into this week's parasha, we'll see that it seems to be said in the singular. It does say veshaftu et ha'am, but it's saying lo tate mishpat, lo takir panim, lo tikach shochad. It seems to be speaking, it doesn't say tzedek tzedek tirdofu, it says tzedek tzedek tirdof. Everything is being said, so to speak, in the singular terminologies, lema'an tichyeh, so that you could live and that you could inherit the land. All of a sudden, we start to notice a shift. It's a subtle shift, but it's a very important shift for us. In the beginning of the book of Devarim, we were moving away from this vertical existence, from this connection of us with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the desert. Since he took us out of Mitzrayim, the entire experience was us and God. And now, in the beginning of the book of Devarim, Moshe is veering into this horizontal existence and saying it's time for you to start to build your communities. It's time for you to start to build horizontal relationships. It's time for you to expand from man to man, from brother to brother. And in the beginning of Devarim, rather than just going upwards, man and God, Adam lamakom, we start to go to Adam lachavero, and this is Moshe's way of telling us and teaching us how we could accomplish this. When we get today to the book of Shoftim, to the parasha of Shoftim, we notice this little subtle change, this idea that now we're not speaking in plurals. Now it's not just about everybody else and a communal social law. We realize that there's a concept, an idea of justice and judgment that moves inward towards our own core. The movement that was going up and then across is now going inward. And in order for us to understand what Perashat Shofetim is speaking to, it is, I should always say this first, it is speaking about appointing judges and placing them in the cities, and you need to govern your cities with righteousness. That's clear, no question about it. But if we want to understand why the Torah would be repetitive, we've seen this command before. We've had this idea about not showing favoritism. We've had that. We saw it just a minute ago in the beginning of Parashat Devarim. We have to say there's another element, there's another layer, there's another level that the Torah is speaking to that we today hopefully would like to tap into. And so if we want to get a true sense of what this idea of shofet means, shafat, shoftim, where does that emanate? What is our first understanding of it? What is the Torah speaking about when it speaks about shoftim? We would have to go back, of course, to Bereshit, and we would go to where am I? Let's go first before anything else. Let's go first to the understanding that the entire book of Devarim is a national Lech Lecha. The entire book of Devarim is an instruction for how we could move forward, how we could move forward to the promised land, how we could move forward to the promises that God made to Abraham. It's a forward movement. And within the forward movement, God is saying you need to have this thing called shoftim. You need to be able to tap into whatever mishpat is. And we should know that shoftim and mishpat isn't so common in the book of Bereshit. It appears a total of 9 times, comparatively with the 47 times it appears in the book of Devarim. In the book of Devarim, there's more of a call for this thing called shofet, and I don't believe it's just speaking to judicial courts and judges. I believe there's something else being said here. And if we start to compare this idea of shoftim, of what's being called for here, and we compare it, if we'll turn to page 62 for a minute, you'll be surprised maybe. There are 7 verses that have this idea, shoftim, in the book of Bereshit. You might be surprised that I would even take you to this reference of the word mishpat. So we're looking for the verb, the root, shin, pe, taf. We're looking for this shefat, what it means, what mishpat means. And it appears in a very unusual place that normally I wouldn't reference or highlight, but I have to be honest. If I'm going to do a search for where does the first place mishpat appears, and then it appears somewhere where I'm not so happy about, I can't just ignore it. We have to look at it and look a little closer and say, hey, 1 minute. How does this fit into our understanding of mishpatim that Moshe is speaking to at the cusp of the Jordan River when the people are about to get into the land? So in chapter 14 of Bereshit, in verse 7, Vayashuvu Vayavo'u el en mishpat. This word for mishpat is actually the name of a place. Hu Kadesh. It's speaking about Kadesh. Vayaku et kol sedeh Amaleki vegam et ha'emori hayoshev bechatzon Tamar. I'll just tell you, as a person who loves to do research, it's not so much fun to find the first place where mishpat appears to be the name of a place. But if we're open and we're honest, and we like to really say the Torah is perfect, if we ponder what's being written here, again, I dropped a pin on Pasuk 7. I'm hoping the rest of you have been reading the peripheral writings of what's taking place in chapter 14. So just so that you have a little bit of a background, chapter 14 is speaking about the wars that were taking place in Sodom and Amorah. There were 4 kings, they defeated the 5 kings, and later on Abraham is going to defeat the 4 kings that defeated the 5 kings. Now what does that have to do with us and Shoftim? It has everything to do with us. It has with us to do today as it had to do with them back then. Moshe is telling them, when you go to your cities, I want you to appoint shoftim. He's not just speaking about judges. He's saying, do you want to understand what justice is? And he's saying, put it in all your she'arim, in all of your cities. What do you think might be running through the minds of the people as he's saying that? They might be saying to themselves, let's not forget this was the generation that survived, that came after the generation who heard from the account of the spies that went into the land. There may have been a little bit of a hesitation on the part of the people. And what does Moshe come to tell us? Do you want to really understand what the word mishpat means? You know what mishpat is? You know what justice is? Justice is taking back your land. Let me remind you, I'm going to use this word shoftim, so you'll go to the first mishpat and you'll see that there, Abraham had captured this property. You're only taking back what your forefather Abraham had promised to you. And we had said that if we keep laws and we keep justice and we have a just society, then God will give us the promises that he made to Abraham. Well, God promised Abraham the land. And if you're feeling that it's not yours and it's not just and it's not something, Sodom and Amorah happen to have been, what makes this even greater is why connect the people who are going into the land to the story of Sodom. Because Sodom was located, Sodom and Amorah were right by the Jordan River on the south part of Canaan. It might even be very close to the region where Yericho was, or where the people were at that time, had they crossed the Jordan at that point. And so what's being said here in our Perashah, when he says Shoftim, it doesn't just mean judges, it means having the ability to know your rights. And your rights are that you're going back to a place that you once inhabited. Even, now this is a very important part now. We said that the idea of Shoftim here in this week's chapter is an internal movement, a movement inwards. And so possibly what God is saying on another level is that, yes, Sodom and Amorah were destroyed, yet we're going back to that area, that region. We're crossing the Jordan and coming back into Eretz Yisrael. And maybe what God is saying is, you may have places inside of you that have become completely destroyed emotionally. You may have places that you think that you can't return to, whether they're spiritually, whether they're emotionally. There are places that you might feel are no longer accessible to you. There are doors you may have already closed. And this word shoftim, taking us back to these places that were once forgotten and were once long gone, they are going to once again be fertilized and be rejuvenated. And part of the concept of shoftim is having a sense of this revitalization. All of a sudden, that takes on an entire new aspect for us. We can take Avraham himself. Let's go for a minute in Bereshit to chapter 15, because I'd like for you to see it yourselves. Hopefully you have Humashim in front of you. Chapter 15, verse 5. What God is telling Avraham is the exact same thing he's telling us. Vayotze oto hachutza. When God is going to make Abraham into this father of many nations, he's going to take him outside and he tells him, Habetna hashamayma, look up to the heavens and count the stars, if you could even count them all. This is what your offspring is going to be like. Rather than focus on the blessing and the multitude of the offspring, for today I want to ask, why does God have to take him outside? Why does Abraham have to sort of emerge from this inner sanctum? He's in an inner place and he's bringing him out to an outer place. It's very similar to the Jews now in the desert. Right now, we are in a cocoon. This desert has been our womb. Everything we've needed, all of our needs have been met in the womb, in the desert. So too, these inner sanctums provide for us some type of safety, some type of security. But what God's telling us here with Abraham, and Moshe is telling the people at the cusp of the Jordan River, he's saying the same thing. One, he's saying it in the singular, and one, he's saying it nationally, plurally. Same sentence, which is, come outside. You need to come hachutza in order to achieve a sense of self-realization, in order to recreate ourselves, in order to create new paradigms of reality. new standards, new patterns, new expectations of ourselves. In order for us to do that, we have to be able to come outside and emerge from this place of safety, from this place of security. You know, it's very counterintuitive. We would think that continuity is the thing that we most yearn for. We don't like to rock the boat. We'd like for things to be very calm and still waters. And that's what we yearn for. And that's sort of within the realm of continuity. But discontinuity, like he tells Avraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladetecha, okay, up and out, time to change everything. You're changing your land, you're changing your birthplace, you're changing your name, we're changing everything about you. What is God saying? He's saying that all of this change, all of this discontinuity, all of this destabilizing, so to speak, all of the removal of the status quo, the familiar, the comfortable, all of that, removing all of that is what's going to help us emerge into this new reality and this new rebirth. Look, rebirth is sometimes painful. It's painful, must be. I don't remember, but babies cry usually when they're born, and there's a lot of literature saying it's a very painful, emotionally or even physically, the detachment from the womb, from the place that they've been familiar with, to come out into the world. But once we come, we call that a birth. It's actually the start of something new. And so we don't always want to start something new. Very often we're happy with the thing that we have in the place that we're in. We don't want to be moved or jostled or feel at all in any way that we're being discombobulated. But the Torah is here to tell us, in order for us to start new beginnings and cross new thresholds, sometimes we have to undergo this transformative exercise, which means leaving behind the things that were the continuity and the things that were familiar to us. And so when we start our Sefer, our parasha today, when we start with this idea of Shoftim, Shefat, Shofet, we have to understand, what is it that God is asking of us? Yes, he's asking us to look back to the first Shofet, which says what? It's time to go back. When you're going into Eretz Israel, don't think you're first crossing a finish line. You're returning to a place that you had already been, and you're returning to a place that you're entitled to. And whether you're entitled to it legally because Avraham recaptured it, or you're entitled to it legally because Hashem promised it to you, God is saying a return to the land is justice. That is a form of justice. And if we want to be just with ourselves, we have to allow ourselves also. If one time we were once in a carefree, childlike, happy without any, whatever it is, things bogging us down place, God is saying, Shoftim, you're allowed to find your way back to a place. It might be a new place, but you are allowed to find a way back to a place where you once had these emotions because you own them, because you belong to them. They belong to you. That is a right that you have, that you're entitled to. And so as we are following this idea of Shoftim, we're going to follow it in the book of Bereshit and the times that it appears, because I believe that every time that this word appears, it just adds a new layer for us. The next time it appears is chapter 16, verse 5, and in the blue books, it's page 70. And so I'll give you a minute to find it. And for those of you who found it, don't forget the system. I drop a pin, and then you look around at the peripherals and you say, what's taking place in chapter 16, verse 5? I'll read it for you, and let's see if you know where we are. Sarai tells Avram, the strong words, Chamasi alecha. My chamas is towards you. I gave you my shivcha, and she saw that she became pregnant. Va'ekal be'eneha, and I became light in her eyes. And then we have this word again. This is the second appearance of the shafat word. Yishpot Hashem beni ubenecha. So if we took a minute and got the context of what's being said here, is Sarah is asking God to judge. And what is he judging? He's judging that Abraham is about to become a father and Sarah is barren. That's her contention. We're sort of dealing here with the haves and the have-nots. He has a baby on the way. She has not a baby on the way. The concept, if ever, of lo takir panim is going to come to play over here. We can't show favoritisms here. The law is not something, again, we're talking about establishing shoftim, judges in the land. The Torah is going to come and give us a very important lesson, and it's going to say that the law is not here to favor one side over the other. The Torah is actually coming, this is why it's so beautiful. Shoftim is actually coming here to show our limitations. What's beautiful is on the one side, they give all of this rope and all of this leeway to the shoftim. You could go anywhere, you could be anything, you could claim, you have rights, you have all of this. And in the next verse, in the next appearance, it's saying, Yishpot Hashem beni ubenecha. Sarah is saying, she's not just saying it to Abraham. Of course, she's telling Abraham, let God be the judge between you and me. Yes, that's what she's saying. But the fact that it's recorded, and I have privy to what Sarah told her husband Abraham, that means that it's recorded here for all of us for all time. And I believe that what she's saying in the lesson that she's teaching us is that Hashem yishpot, shefot Hashem. Hashem, God, is going to be the judge, meaning the shoftim have a role. The judges, the earthly courts have a role. But their role is limited. They have certain spectrums that they cover, certain sectors that they cover, and they're able to evaluate a lot of things. But there are certain cases like hers, which is a case of infertility, or in cases of death, for instance, there are certain cases where we have to say, when somebody passes away, we say the words Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, because the one of Din, the judge, the person who the only being that could weigh in on justice in a case like that is only God. So at the same time that they're telling us, establish shoftim in all of your cities, Sarah is saying, yes, you should establish shoftim in all your cities, but be aware that human judges have limitations, and there are some things that only God could judge. And again, if we want to take this inwardly, and we want to make this an internal journey, and we want to say, yes, that's speaking for sure to judicial cases, but what about within ourselves? And what about when we make assessments and we are judging of ourselves? You know, we're our biggest critics, we're our harshest judges. Sometimes it helps to turn here to chapter 16, verse 5, and say, you know what? Hashem yishpot. Hashem is going to be the one who can be the ultimate judge. And even in the idea like here of the haves and the have-nots, we may think that we don't have something. We may think that we're the ones that are lacking things. Lo takir panim. Don't favor, even when it comes to your own panim, even when it comes to your own self. Be aware that God is the ultimate judge, and in certain cases and certain things, we can't make a complete evaluation. The next Yishpot is going to really solidify it for us and make it a much easier understanding of what's being spoken to in this week's Perashah. And that would be in chapter 18, verse 19. This is very beautiful. It's page 82 in the blue books. It happens to have this concept of shofet twice, so we'll speak about them together. First, we'll speak about the first one, because this one has tzedakah and mishpat. So we're going to have to unpack some of those. So it says, ki yedativ. Hopefully you've been scanning. It's speaking about the love that God has for Abraham, and that blessing that he's going to give to him. The entire world's going to be blessed through Abraham, and we should be sitting up straight and say, how does blessing come into the world? God is telling us here clearly, he's giving us the recipe for nivrechu bo kol goyei haaretz. How are we going to get all of the world to be blessed by the Jewish people, the children of Abraham, by us? Ki yedativ, because God says, I know him. I know that he's going to instruct his children, his household after him. That's us. That we're beto acharav, we're his family, his household that comes after him. Veshamru et derech Hashem, to follow in the ways of God, to do tzedakah and mishpat, so that God could enact everything that he had promised to Abraham. So the first piece of this idea, Shoftim, the first idea of righteousness or judicial or judging, the first concept, I should say, of justice is this component of intergenerational transmission. We all have a social responsibility. It's literally the way that we educate our children and the next generation. That's part of the tzedakah u'mishpat, but there's another piece to it right here. So this is all right before God is going to destroy Sodom. He tells Abraham his plan, and in the next few verses, excuse me, and in the next few verses, Abraham is going to go through an entire negotiation, a bargaining, a pleading with God. And if you'll remember, he says, Abraham in verse 23 approaches God, vayigash, it's with a sense of passion he approaches him. And he says, ha'af tispet tzaddik im rasha, is it possible that you're going to destroy the tzaddik together with the rasha? Maybe there's 50 tzaddikim in the city. And he keeps doing his bargaining. And of course, God says, no problem. If you have 50 tzaddikim, consider yourself safe. And on he goes on until finally, part of his negotiation is verse 25. This is very strong. These are very, very strong words. This is Abraham speaking to God, and this conversation is recorded because it speaks about God's justice and it speaks about man's justice. And I think it's an important verse. Chalila lecha. This is Abraham telling God. It's Chalila. It's what's a good word for Chalila? It's English would say probably sacrilege, like chol, like it's not kadosh, like the opposite of kadosh is chol. I mean, it's a hard word to translate, especially if you're talking about God. So I want to be careful. Abraham is saying, Chalila lecha. This would not be very, very proper of you. Abraham speaking to God. It's not me saying this. Me'asot kadavar Hashem, to kadavar hazeh, to do such a thing. Lehamit tzaddik im rasha. How could you kill a tzaddik together, a righteous person together with a wicked person? Vehaya katzadik kerasha. What is a tzaddik the same as a rasha? Are they one and the same? They're two different people, so they have to be judged separately. And what Abraham is saying is, if you're going to destroy the entire city and there are tzaddikim in the city, now you just judged everybody with one in one fell swoop. And then he says these words again, Chalilalach. This is, I'm going to read from the English. It would be sacrilege to you. He's speaking to Hashem. Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. Is it possible that the judge of the land is not going to do justice? I mean, these are very serious words. It's a serious question. We've learned this. You know, do you want to consider Abraham having chutzpah to speak to God this way? He doesn't say it once, but he says it twice. Chalilah once, Chalilah twice. It's recorded here in the Torah. I think there's a message and there's a certain honesty that we have to approach the text with when we look at it this way. First of all, here Abraham is the defender and God is the judge. In our book, God's asking us to be the judge. And so what Abraham is saying, are you set to God? Are you setting a precedent for the way we should judge by the way you're judging now? Is it okay for the good and the bad to die together? Is that going to be, is that possible? You know what's so interesting about this? Here, Abraham is the defender and God is the judge. There is going to be a time in our life where we're going to be both the defender and the judge. There is an understanding that the rabbis bring. It's often taught together when the 13 attributes of God are presented, that God is a El Rachum, He's a Chanun, He's patient, He's merciful, He's slow to anger, and He has a kindness and compassion, and all of these attributes. Maybe we'll learn them for Yom Kippur, because it's said over and over in that tefillah. But one of the teachings about the attributes of God is not that we should be singing God His praises, that we acknowledge all of His praises. It's that God said these words to Moshe when he was on the mountain. And at that point, we weren't sure if Moshe said them to God, if God said them to Moshe, if they were spoken simultaneously. But in either regard, if we're intended to be mirror images of God, this is a very famous way to have a commentary, is that if we're supposed to mirror God, then on Yom Kippur, we're reminding ourselves that the way God is merciful and the way God is patient and the way God has compassion, we need to really, really channel those attributes so that we could reflect God in that way. If we are patient, then so too God will be patient with us in that regard. Here, what's being said, and just to close that circle for a minute, what is also taught along those lines is, yes, it's great to learn to be patient with other people and compassionate for other people and have mercy for other people, but that is really just so that we could learn to have all of those attributes towards our ultimate selves. What I mean by that is there's a belief that in 120, when a person passes, we've heard this in other cultures, people say, I saw my life flash before me. When I was a child, they used to say, oh, they're going to play you a video of your whole life. And, they're going to pause at the good things, they'll pause at the bad things. I don't know what relationship anybody has to this end of time for ourselves, but one of the ideas is that, yes, we will be able to see our lives, and at that point, we will be what's being said in this pasuk. We will be the defendant, and we will be the judge. the lawyer and the judge, meaning we're going to get to see our own selves and our own lives, and whatever judgment we make for ourselves, meaning if we're a person who usually judges favorably, then we'll judge ourselves favorably and we'll give ourselves a pass. And if we never give ourselves a break and never judge anybody else favorably, we're certainly not going to judge ourselves in that way. And the idea here is Abraham is saying, God, if you want me and us and humanity to be just judges, then you need to give me more to go by. You need to give me something to work on. I can't be witness to a situation where the good and the evil are dying together and you're judging the good the same way you're judging the evil. And so here, this Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat, it's even speaking to us, to our own internal selves, meaning if we are, I would like to think that most of us here are pretty good, decent people. I'd like to say most of us are law-abiding and most of us are way more good than we are bad. What Abraham is saying is, how could you take the good and totally just let it get swept up with the bad? Meaning, with ourselves. Now we're the opposite of this equation. Over there were very few tzaddikim and many reshaim. Few good people and many evil people. For us, for ourselves, if we were to judge ourselves, we probably have way more good deeds and good traits and good attributes. And we probably have much less flaws. And so in this case, we have to be able, when we're judging our tzadikness with our transgressional self, we have to be able to say to ourselves, we're mostly good. We can't just take that goodness of ours and just throw it out and not give it its proper due. This idea, shoftim and shotrim, again, yes, we're being told to bring judges when we establish our new cities and our new lands. But in order to do that, and in order to really go back, we're not just going back to the land as a nation, we're also going back to our own Abrahamic selves. What I mean by going back, this is probably the most important idea that Moshe is presenting, is yes, you're part of a group and you're part of a nation and you're all going back together. But there's also a component of recapturing what Abraham did. Abraham was a pioneer. He invented and reinvented himself over and over. I don't want you to lose that spirit too. I don't want you to get lost in the whole and not celebrate who you are. And in order, and this is where we're spending most of our time, is the celebration of the self and the rebirth of the self and the re-emergence of the self and the recreation of the self. All of this is being spoken to in Sefer Devarim, because who better to tell a story about recreating ourselves than Moshe? How many times did he recreate himself? He was born a Jew. He was raised an Egyptian. He became a shepherd. God asked him to become. His resume is so long. He keeps reinventing himself over and over at different times with different people. This is what the Torah is asking of us. And in order to have the flexibility, it's very easy to just stay stuck. And that's what I was talking about earlier, to be in a continuous pattern, to give way to conformity. And the Torah is saying, no, actually the reinventing ourselves is what's going to make us the strong, not just strong individuals, but it's going to make us literally children of Abraham. The DNA that says every day is a day to reinvent, to reconsider, to question the norms, to question the what is, to break new barriers, to make new inventions, to create new things. This is what part of the Abrahamic legacy is. I'm going to take you to the next place where it has our word shofet. It's in chapter 19, verse 9. And this is also very interesting. It's on page 86 in Bereshit. This is really the real definition. I keep saying that about each one, but all of these speak to the concept of justice and judgment. So if you had a second to just peruse the verses around verse 9, at this point, the angels have come to Lot. They're in his house. The people of the city are livid. Send us out the people so they could be tortured. And Lot is begging the people not to harm his guests. And the people of the town of Sodom say, Gesh hala, move aside. Vayomru, and then they sneer this remark. They make a remark about Lot amongst them, amongst themselves, and they say, Ha-echad ba'alagur, looky here, one echad, this one guy comes to live with us. He's really a ger, lagur, he's not even really one of us. Vishpot, shafot, and he thinks now he's going to be a judge. He actually was a judge. According to the commentaries, he was sitting at the gates of the city because he was a judge. But they don't like the way that he's judging, and so now they are mocking his office of justice, saying, who does this guy think he is? He just comes from out of town, and he decides that he's going to make himself the boss of us. Who is he? And they decide that they want to try and come harm him and his guests. Ultimately, the echad balagur, this is a very important concept of injustice. The idea that number one is, yes, he was a shofet and they didn't like it because Lot would not concede to lawlessness. Lot is the echad, is the one. Sometimes when it comes to justice, it takes one person to turn the tides. Don't, because you're living, this is an understanding even for when we get into Eretz Yisrael, regardless of what the mode is, regardless of what's in fashion, regardless of what's taking place, the echad, you be the echad. You be that one who is going to live a sense of righteousness and who's going to uphold civil and moral justice. And part of this shefot, part of this judging, part of this justice, the echad, this idea of one person is sometimes all it takes to bring justice to being. It goes back again internally. If you're the one, then you have to be shafot, shafot. You see, those two words are playing with each other. You should have constantly back and forth in your own mind. You should be judging your own judgments. It should be, you need to be in a constant state of checks and balances in order for you to be that echad, that one. Now we're going to go to chapter 31. In Bereshit, it's page 168. Chapter 31, verse 53. Very odd place for us to see this word, but again, it's important for us. I'll just take a minute for those of you who tuned in a little late, why I'm going down this road, why we're investigating all the 7 verses that have this word shafot. Of course, I believe the number 7, the time of Pesukim that have the references of shafot. I even think that that's indicative. There's a cycle. This is a cycle, a natural cycle that the world will uphold itself with. So if we're going to want to understand this idea of shafot, we're going to go here to verse 53. Hopefully while I was speaking, you were perusing. It speaks of Lavan and Yaakov. After Yaakov had left him, Lavan catches up to Yaakov. They make a treaty, Yagad Sheheduta. They make this pile of rocks, a heap of witness that there will be peace between the house of Lavan and the house of Yaakov. And then there's a swearing. And here is the swearing. It really starts, if you start on verse 53, you'll see the one that is speaking is Lavan is speaking to Yaakov. And Lavan is saying, I put up this monument so that you will never pass this monument to bring any type of evil to me. And then he swears, and this is Lavan swearing, Elohe Avraham ve'Elohe Nahor, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, Yishpetu Benenu, should judge between us. Now, I don't know if he's saying that both of those should judge us, or that the God of Abraham should be on one team and the God of Nahor should be on the other team, and they will be judging to make sure, to ensure our peace treaty. Regardless, he says, Yishpetu benenu Elohe avihem, the God of their father. The God of their father is the God of Terach. So we're not sure exactly what Lavan is asking us to do, whose name he's asking us to swear in, because the God of Terach wasn't necessarily Borei Olam, and the God of Nahor wasn't necessarily Hakadosh Baruch Hu. So what does Yaakov do? Vayishba Yaakov. So Yaakov swears in the name of Befachad Aviv Yitzchak. He swears in the name of his own father. I think there's an important law here for us. There is a civil court and there is a heavenly court. Both of those exist. And sometimes we're going to find ourselves with the Lavans of the world who may want to swear in the names of other forces. But as Jews, Vayishba Yaakov Befachad Aviv Yitzchak. He makes sure to keep it clean, to keep it neat. Lavan swearing in the names of his grandfathers, which are questionable. Yaakov makes a point, I'm going to swear in the name of my father Yitzchak, because my father Yitzchak, I am sure who his God was. And so it's just making us aware that we are not, it's not all going to be just a bet din. You may find yourself in other courts. Just be very careful before we make any kind of swears that it's all directed towards Borei Olam. The last and final is my favorite of the mishpats. I happen to be a big fan of this whole story, but I'll take you there now. It's chapter 40, verse 13. It's on page 218. And again, these all seem like they are unrelated mishpats. We have 7 mishpats that hardly have one to do with the other, especially when you see this one. But I think the Torah is telling us in a very subtle way what mishpat actually is. And I'm using the word justice because, first of all, I don't have a better word, and maybe when we end the class, some of you can help me out with this. It doesn't just mean justice in the sense of a court of law. I'll explain here, because this is our final mishpat in the book of Bereshit, and then we're going to tie it up with tzedek, hopefully. And so if you turn to verse 13, again, hopefully you've been grazing through the Pesukim along the way. Yosef has been interpreting the dreams of the butler and the baker. The butler here is going to get now his interpretation. In verse 12, Yosef tells him this is the solution. The 3 vines represent 3 days. And now our verse 13. In 3 more days, Paro is going to lift up your head and he's going to return you to your post, and you're going to give the kos of Paro, the goblet of Paro, beyado, in his hand, kamishpat harishon, exactly as the former practice that you used to do when you used to give him his drinks. And what a strange word to use, kamishpat harishon, like the earlier justice, like what was just for you, literally, in the earlier days. I think the word mishpat is being used here not for the butler. It would be wasted on the butler. The word mishpat here, in its context, is telling us everybody makes mistakes, but we could all come back from those mistakes, and we could all go back to mishpat harishon. We could serve our king once again by coming back to our earlier practice. The idea here is that everybody has an opportunity for a comeback. Here it's speaking about the king of Paro. I believe it's speaking for eternity, that when it comes to our King God, he is going to allow us to stand before him and service him once again, and a comeback is always possible, regardless of what the incriminations against us have been. This is, this is a very beautiful idea, and specifically they teach it to us with Yosef. Yosef is using the word mishpat. It's Yosef that brought us down to Egypt, and it's with Yosef's bones that we're going to return to Eretz Yisrael. This whole, we did a little run on the word mishpat and shoftim. I would like to go back now to our Perashah and analyze what these words mean, this idea of mishpat tzedek. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. If the word mishpat was a milah mancha, a light word, a word that appears many times, it appeared 4 times. Well, tzedek also in these 3 verses appears 3 times. This thing tzedek, they want us to chase after something called tzedek, tzedakah. And we're not 100% sure what tzedakah is. But now, having learned about Abraham and having learned of his Lech Lecha, and having learned the idea that he had to break his connections with the familiar, he had to construct new norms for himself. The Torah is saying that sometimes when we take ourselves out of our minds, so to speak, out of your mind today means to be crazy, yet the idea of going out of our minds, there's a pasuk in Tehillim that says, Teref Natan Le'yirav. This idea of teref, of tearing, of ripping, of breaking, of starting something new, tearing away the old, starting the new. It's trying to tell us, Yirav, who gets a chance to be able to tear away from something old and still be able to start something new? Yirav, the ones who have yirah, who have a sense of awe, who believe in the ability for infinite possibilities. That's really the idea that's being said here. So this idea of mishpat tzedek, for instance, I know I only have 2 minutes, so I'll try and be quick. If you want to see where tzedek first appears, it appears with Malki Tzedek. It appears with him recognizing Koneh Shamayim Va'aretz, recognizing the Creator. And this idea of tzedakah is also attributed to Abraham. Ve'emin behashem v'yichsheveh hatzedakah. God, we had seen that pasuk earlier, God is going to reward Abraham because Abraham believes in God. Part of what's being said here is that recognizing God, or recognizing that God is the creator who is still creating. The fact that God would tell Abraham, a man of 100 years old who has no children, that he's going to have as many children as the stars of the sky, requires a belief. This belief is that the Creator is still creating. And the ultimate goal for us is to understand that if we're to mirror God, then we have to constantly be creating, and we have to constantly be recreating ourselves. And in order to recreate ourselves, we have to be able to accept new paradigms of perception. It's the creative gift of the tzaddik to be able to move to these new places that are being open to us. In Perashat Shofetim, the new place is the promised land in Eretz Yisrael. I believe that we are always standing on the cusp of a Jordan River, and we are always in a womb that we need to emerge from. And in order to emerge from these wombs, may take pain, may take suffering, may take effort, may take stamina, belief, faith, strength, whatever it is. But God is telling us here, Shoftim, you all are judges. I'm giving you the word Shoftim in the singular to tell you the first judge, the first person that you need to judge is yourselves. And in judging yourselves, recognize all of your greatness, recognize all of your potentials. Don't allow a couple of transgressions or a couple of traits that aren't so favorable to cloud your entire judgment, not of yourself, not of others. Go forward into the new land. Every day is a crossing of the Jordan River. Every day is an opportunity to do this emergence that's being asked for of us here. I thank you all for listening. Feel free to unmute yourselves. Oh, I see there's a chat over here. Let me just see if there's something here. I see a question from Esther. Hashem takes the righteous people in order to save the world. Until when would it be the case that the good people have to die early to give more chances to the Rasha? I don't know if it's a question or if it's a comment, but that's one of the biggest questions of the world, is why does the tzaddik have to die? And in this world, we see the Rishaim proliferating. It's part of the upside down nature of the physical world that we're in, and only God, I believe, is the judge. Oh, Amalia, God forbid. That's a great word for Khalila. See, this is why I miss being in class. That would have been a very good translation. God forbid. Thank you. And everybody else, thank you for joining us. I hope to be giving class next week. I'm going to try and go through so that we don't go through to the Chagim without having classes together. And that's it. Thanks for joining us. Let's see, participants.